Welcome back to another episode. So I'm going to talk financial therapy today, which means I'm going to talk financial and I'm going to talk about money and emotions, the therapy part. So, a lot of people, when asked how long do they think they're going to live, or in any attempt to seriously consider the likelihood that they might outlive their retirement income, in my experience, is usually kind of blown off. It's most people I find assume that they're going to die sooner than later. We see this a lot with Social Security, where on the average, and I'm being really general here, it makes sense for a person to wait till they're 70 to start taking Social Security because it's considerably higher, like probably about 50% higher than at 62 and probably around 25% higher than at 66, 67. And emotionally, our brain is kind of wired that money in the hand now is better than money later. It's kind of like the present value of money, and a lot of studies done on heuristics and how our brains work around that. So most people really underestimate the chances that they will live past. I think the break even for Social Security is living beyond 78 to 82 or 83. So in other words, if you wait to take your Social Security until 70, you'll be ahead if you make it to somewhere between 78 and 83, let's say. And most people assume they won't. They just assume the risk is too high. Well, actuarially, chances are that you will make it past then. And that you're leaving money on the table. And this is borne out by the last data I saw on people who take Social Security. 48% take it at 62, 48% at 66, 67, only 4% wait until they're 70. So it's not surprising that usually when I bring up the topic of longevity, especially say with a financial planning client, it's kind of blown off, laughed off. And oftentimes it's one of those laughs. It's more about anxiety than it is anything that's really funny. I don't know about you, but I tended in my past, especially to laugh at things that weren't funny. And it was just kind of a nervous, anxious laugh. A ha 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 ha. That is more about this is making me uncomfortable and I'd rather not talk about it. And it's passed off as funny. And with an IFS lens, those are the parts of ourselves that are really trying to protect that vulnerable part. And rather than go there and deal with the emotions that outliving our money might be bringing up, that they manage our way right out of focusing any attention on it. So from a financial planning perspective, the greatest financial risk we have for depleting retirement resources is living too long. And furthermore, it's an unexpected and lengthy stay in a long-term health care facility like a nursing home or assisted living center. Estimates show, and I just verified these today, that about 50%, I think what I was looking at said 51, 52, but about 50% of older adults are going to need long-term care at some point in their lives. And if you are over 65, the odds shoot up to 70%. Now, long-term care, again, is somebody there assisting us because we can no longer 100% take care of ourselves. It can be in a nursing home. It can be in assisted living. It can be to some degree like an independent care. It can be certainly in our houses where we're assisted. But 70%, okay, that is huge, right? Probability is huge. So how are we going to get that care? The current reality is that there's not enough units to take care of the demand. I'm part of the baby boomer generation, and we're getting older, right? And our parts are beginning to fail. And that's not necessarily our interior parts, but our exterior parts. And when we look at long-term care, which means, again, it's not acute care. It's not I need to go to the doctor today. It's I need help with my everyday living. And that type of care is expensive, precisely because the supply is limited. It's a pretty simple supply and demand. So that's a reason that the supply is so expensive. So this means there's often waiting lists to get into, whether it's independent care, assisted living, nursing care, whatever it is. Waiting lists can run from months to literally years. And in my town, or Rapid City where I live, you might have to wait months for a studio apartment. And if you want a larger, more spacious unit with maybe a couple bedrooms or more, last I checked, the waiting lists were around 5 years. So it's a problem. And I get asked a lot, what do you think about long-term care insurance? Well, long-term care insurance is fine, but if you can't get in, that's a problem. Now, long-term care insurance can start to pay for long-term care in your home if the policy has that provision. Not all of them do. Some, like mine, provide for 50% of the coverage can go toward in-home care. And the better policies today will allow 100% of the benefit to be applied to staying in your home. I like to say, as a rule of thumb, when it comes to the question, what do you think about long-term care insurance? If a person has a net worth of over $3 million, you can probably afford to self-insure your long-term healthcare needs, meaning you can probably afford to spend down your retirement nest egg. Now, whether you are married or single makes a big difference. If you're single, maybe something less than $3 million. But probably if you're married, around $3 million or more. Now, it's a calculation that you need to have your financial planner do. Because typically there's enough money for the first spouse that needs to go into long-term care. It's the second spouse, the remaining spouse, the surviving spouse, that is most at risk of running out of money. So it's a calculation that needs to be made. But just as a rule of thumb, $3 million or more, you're probably fine. And also, ironically, if you're worth under 250,000, you probably don't need long-term care insurance either, because you'll probably be able to qualify for Medicaid, which is Title 19 long-term care. Medicare does not cover long-term care over 100 days. Medicaid, Title 19, when you're broke, you have no assets, will pay for some type of long-term care. So you really don't need long-term care if you have no money. Insurance, that is, insurance. So since this care, the cost of the care is so high in my area, a nursing home is $10,000 to $12,000 a month. Well, long-term care is probably half that. I mean, by that I mean assisted living is about half that. Obviously, it's a risk that one would say I probably need to insure against, but unfortunately, the coverage is so expensive, just a fraction of Americans have it. There's fewer than 1 in 30 Americans own a long-term care insurance policy. And if you look at Americans over 50 years old, only 7% have a long-term care policy. It means 93% don't. Again, why? They're really costly. And they've done nothing but go up. The premiums have gone up and up and up over time. And this is because interest rates have been so low, so that the insurance companies haven't been able to meet the returns that they thought they'd be able to get on the money. There's low lapse rates, meaning they figured more people would cancel their policies than would have. And more people are living longer, and the cost of living longer are increasing. So that's just driven long-term care policies up. And fewer and fewer people obviously are buying them. Like the peak was in 2002, and 750,000 people bought long-term care policies. And in 2018, that had fallen around 93% to 53,000 or 57,000 people. So that's why we're looking at such low coverage. And this really became real to my wife and I. I mean, I deal in statistics and probabilities all the time as a financial planner and a financial therapist. But we received a notice of another premium increase on our, what I'll call a modest long-term care policy. It will only cover about 50% of a nursing home. If the nursing home is $12,000, our policy will cover about half that, or $6,000. The cost is going to go up from $3,300 a year currently to $8,600 a year 2 years from now. That's an increase of 160% in a 2-year period of time. Now, I've been told that purchasing a new policy with the same terms as my current one would be even more expensive than $8,600 a year on both of us. Kind of interesting. We purchased this policy in 2007 for an annual premium of $1,750 a year. So this policy over 18 years will have increased 400%. I would suggest to you that's a little higher than the cost of inflation. So there's little wonder why only 7% of Americans over 50 have long-term care insurance, even though 70% of those over 65 are going to need long-term care. So this really puts the cost of insurance out of the reach of most. So having a personal plan on how you are going to provide long-term care for yourself becomes even more crucial. So even though you may not need long-term care or you can't get long-term care insurance, you're going to need a long-term care plan. So how do you go about putting this together? Well, the first thing is for us to embrace the parts of us that get scared. Embrace the part that is really feeling vulnerable. I'm familiar with this part. I often have 2 a.m. sessions. It depends how long they are from night to night. But then, as you know, everything looks worse at 2 a.m. And I've had some fear over growing older, watching my parents, in their 90s, and the amount of care that they need. Some fear about not being able to care for myself in a way that I've taken for granted for my whole life. So the appropriate thing for me to do is not blow it off and say, well, I'm not there yet. It's a long way off, which I've done. But it's starting to get more and more intentional about making sure my house can be retrofitted to plan for that. And it's important even for somebody like myself that can afford long-term care insurance, still to plan, because like anybody else, I want to stay in my house as long as I possibly can. So it's really important that I embrace the fear of that vulnerable part that's scared, that's scared of getting old, that's scared of needing to ask for help, that may be scared of the cost. And be able to really be with those parts and face that inevitability and begin to really plan for it. So the first thing you might want to do in addressing this, how do I come up with a healthcare plan for myself outside of facing the emotional, working through the emotional issues of it, is considering how long am I going to live? Now, of course, you don't know. Nobody knows, right? But we can get good estimates. I mean, obviously, if you have terminal cancer, the chances of your longevity are way shorter than if you don't. So getting some idea of how long you could, the probability would exist for your longevity is important. There's a number of sites that will help you with this. We give a couple of these tests to all of our financial planning clients to help determine this, right? Because if you have a history of cancer in your family, people dying in their 60s and 70s, you're really overweight, you have underlying comorbidities, seriously, that's going to affect your planning. And that all needs to be taken into consideration versus you eat right, you work out every day, you're extremely fit, right? So one of the sites I like is called livingto100.com. And in preparation for this podcast, I retook this. I took it back in 2016, And I went from 93 years expected mortality at 93 to 98. That was in 2016. So I was a little, how far have I gone down? I took it today and I went up 2 years to 100. Now, eventually, I don't know. Last time, let's just say it was 5 years ago, and I went from 93 to 98. Now it was 6 years, and I went from 98 to 100. I mean, this is going to slow down, right? But this would suggest that clearly I would have a high probability of waiting till I was 70 to take my Social Security, which I am doing, and that I need to look at my retirement plan and not use 90 or 95 as a target date for death. I need to be using 100, maybe 105 to judge the longevity of my retirement planning. So again, the greatest financial risk, however, is A, outliving your money, and B, running into an unexpected and lengthy stay in a long-term healthcare facility. A few years ago, Carolyn McClanahan, who's an MD and a CFP, talked about how do you put a long-term care plan together. And she said there's really two major issues to consider in creating your own long-term care plan. And that's, where are you willing to live and how will you pay for it? Like I said before, most of us want to live in our own homes. I liked how Carolyn put it, until their toenails turn blue. No matter how appealing this may be, it may not be realistic. So here's some really important things to consider before you get to the point that you can't live in your home anymore. How close are you to services like grocery stores, restaurants, medical facilities? You may not be able to drive there. Walking may be needed, or other ways of getting there. How are you going to interact with others? Really important. I have seen so many of my clients really rebound when they moved into an assisted living center because of the community, because of the connection with other people. What is your plan for home maintenance? You're not going to be able to clean out the gutters for the rest of your life, or do the snow shoveling if you live in Rapid City, or care for the lawn. What's the accessibility for wheelchairs and walkers? How many stairs do you have? This is what ultimately forced my parents out of their split level home. Was they had some immediate physical problems and couldn't get up and down the stairs. You need to look at your floors and your baths and showers and make them non-skid. Grab bars, for example. One thing that's helpful is to install cameras in your living space, and of course have somebody monitoring those at the floor level, which is the least intrusive, just to monitor your activity, to make sure that you're up and moving around, or you're not on the floor, unable to get up. Can your home be dementia proofed? And probably really important, whether in-home medical care and support services are available. For example, in Rapid City, you can get a medical advocate here for $125, $150 an hour. That's expensive, but it's available if you have the money. If you live in Tyler, Texas, an advocate like that is not available. And probably more importantly, are you willing to use them, and can you afford them? Even though we can afford these services, I cannot tell you how many of my clients are unwilling to use them, unwilling to admit they need help because of all the pain that that brings up, and unwilling to write the check even though they can afford it because of all the money scripts around frugality and running out of money. So emotions play a huge part in establishing a solid long-term care plan. Another thing I want to just hit briefly is most long-term care services are not paid for. According to ARP in 2017, over 41 million family caregivers in the U.S. provided $34 billion an hour of care, which cost the caregivers $470 billion. That is stunning. The average caregiver, which is usually a family member, usually 50 to 64 years old, spends 16 to 24 hours a week providing care. And the average cost of their time is about $30. The average length of the time that they're going to care for this person is 4 years. So that easily puts the cost of a family member taking care of a senior family member at around $150,000 when you consider out-of-pocket expenses and things. Now, this was once a statistic to me, but it's very real right now, something my wife and I are experiencing because my wife is the medical advocate for all 4 of our aging parents. And I can tell you the time requirement, the daily phone calls, the online research, the attending medical appointments, the coordinating between healthcare workers easily averages 16 to 24 hours a week or more. So the more retirement savings you have, the more emotional intelligence you have, the more you can avoid placing this type of a burden on your family members. So I would encourage you, if you're in this position, to really do some work around this. If you have a financial therapist, this is really something to take a look at, really bring up and work on. It's pretty obvious that our nation is not planning well for old age. And so many of us feel that by not talking about long-term care planning, it somehow isn't going to become a reality. But the ultimate reality is that by not planning, most elders and their caregivers will have few to no options when they need care. So creating your own long-term health care plan before you need it can increase your options and help you live out your life with more comfort and dignity. So thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Take care.